All right, let's get started. Everyone, thank you so much for being here today. My name is Christine Wyatt. I'm with Upswing. And today I want to welcome you to the first in our fall leadership series. What we're doing is we're drawing upon the expertise and experience of leaders in higher education to really tackle and address those shared challenges. So our panelists today are Dr. Deborah Johansen, President of Hillsborough Community College Brandon Campus, and Janelle, Elias, Interim Vice President, Strategy, Advancement, and National Division at Rio Salado College. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Well, I'm really excited for today's discussion for a couple of reasons. It's been in the news, it's been top of mind, no matter what your role in higher education. We want to talk about some things that are happening, especially in enrollment. Many of these things were spurred by the pandemic, if not caused by them. So we'll talk about things like how to use data to inform your decisions on campus and the importance of flexibility in supporting your students. But before we dive in, just one quick note, everybody now has been in so many Zoom meetings. So thank you for joining us. I want to make sure everybody has a great experience. So just some housekeeping things. We really want to see your questions, and the best way to pose those questions is just to put them in the chat. We'll collect them as we go. We might work some in along the way, but we'll certainly keep track of those for the very end. We've left time for Q&A. So if something sparks your attention, I highly encourage you to put that right in the chat. That way you don't lose track of it, and we can keep a track of those and ask them at the end of the session. So if you don't mind, just stay on mute, and everybody will be able to hear our speakers and panelists, and I'd love to dive in. So I wanted to kind of start with a thought that's a bit different. I'd love to hear from each of you something maybe that surprised you in the last year and a half, something that maybe made you rethink how you approach some of the challenges that you have. And I'll start with you, Dr. Johansen.
Sure. Thank you so much. As we enter this period, we're really in a period of uncertainty. We've been in that period for the last 18 months, but that period is continuing, and people are questioning, students included, their path, their purpose, and their priorities. And that includes the modern day value of a higher education. I think this has resulted not just from the pandemic, but widely available resources over the internet, job increases, as we know, job numbers have gone up, and increases. And those job increases are outpacing, job increases, and then the cost of higher education. And higher education, as we know, is outpacing really those salary increases, which does put a bit of a bottleneck on students. My biggest moment really after the last 18 months has been that we have to meet students where they're at. We can't think in terms of the way we've always thought for the last, let's say 10 plus years about higher education, and that, if we provide it, they will come. I think really looking at where students are at and meeting them there, using artificial intelligence and using that on platforms that students are already on, like TikTok or Instagram, is really important. One of the things that seems like an easy fix is we send students to email. Students don't use a lot of email these days, but yet we continue to do that as our primary communication tool. So that's something for us to look at. And as we embrace this new era and try to figure out how to serve students in this era, we've got to think about how we modernize our institutions and how we use this disruption, because we know through the pandemic we can change, and we can change fast, but how do we use this to leverage what we know about students and continue to provide quality education for them? And so that's something I think about often and ponder. I don't have all the answers. I certainly am thinking about it, though, and I think we should all be thinking about those things.
That's terrific. And it's something we think about a lot at Upswing, because we're trying to reach students that are non-traditional students, and often they're not on campus, so they're working while in college. They may sit down to their coursework at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night when the kids are to bed and the dishes are all washed. So one of the things we like to think about is, this concept used to be like trying so hard to make your students college ready. And we've kind of flipped that on its head. We tell all of our partners, let's not try and make your students college ready. That's beyond our control. But what we can do is make your college students ready, which means exactly what you said, Dr. Johansen, which is let's meet them where they live. So what about you, Janelle? Anything that fundamentally changed the way you approach your role, or something that surprised or enlightened you?
Thanks for the question. Not surprised so much at the trends that were already occurring in higher ed for the past decade or so, such as the overall decline in enrollment in community colleges, the changing demographic, but the pace at which we were able to see higher ed change, I think has been the biggest surprise to me, that we were rather agile and nimble during this period of time. The adoption of online learning has been a surprise. I come from over 20 plus years of working in online education, specifically serving those non-traditional students, having to defend online learning as a legitimate form of higher education to accreditors and whatnot. And so to see that just flip so quickly in the period of 12 to 18 months and be widely accepted is pretty remarkable, and will change the landscape of higher education, especially for institutions like mine that have been primarily online prior to COVID. So I think that it exacerbated or accelerated all of those trends that were already occurring at a rate that is unprecedented. And I hate to overuse that word, but it's been pretty remarkable and shows us that higher ed really has the ability and agility to change.
I agree with you. So I think if you don't work in higher education today, I think the outside in perspective is that it's very slow to move, slow to change, slow to adopt technology. But I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that I've seen institutions really embrace technology. Our own partners have taken, some of the tools that we have and really pushed us on how to use those in order to better serve students almost overnight. Within a week, we had questions about, can, the technology do this? And they were almost like outpacing us in how fast they were innovating just to meet the students where they are and meet their needs today. And I think you're right, Janelle, like we use the word unprecedented because it is. And, unfortunately, because so much of it was tied to the pandemic, and it changes every week sometimes, so what worked last week may not work this week. So it required everybody on every side of the challenge and the equation to be super nimble, really think ahead about what's working. And we'll talk about some of how to measure that when we get to leveraging data. But I think it's interesting to think about what things will stay that we have changed in higher education, and what things will someday just lay down and leave behind that just don't work anymore. But I think it's really shown how flexible, nimble, and fast higher education can move when it really needs to. So I want to turn now to that widespread and that huge drop in enrollment, something we've never seen before, truly, and the roller coaster that's been for higher education institutions and what that means for students. And to set the stage for that, I really want to learn a little bit more about each of your campuses. So I'll start with you, Dr. Johansen. What can you tell us about Hillsborough Community College and your Brandon campus in specific?
Great, thank you so much. So Hillsborough Community College is a large community college in the Tampa area. We serve all of Hillsborough County. We have approximately 47,000 students a year. You'll see some numbers here on this slide, which are annualized for the Brandon campus over there, and then college-wide fall demographics there at 26,000 students just this fall that we'll serve. So over the year, we'll serve about 47,000 students. We are heavily female. We are primarily under 24, and we are minority majority institution. We are a Hispanic serving institution, and we are situated in a very diverse area that is growing really with a technology base in the community. So again, and dual enrollment, as I'm sure many of your institutions are, is growing at an unprecedented rate as a way to control costs for students and a way to get students into college level courses. And you'll notice there I'm the Brandon campus present. So I provided you just some stats on the Brandon campus as it compares to the college as a whole. And so we are a little heavier female. We've got a little younger age population there as well. So again, we had to move directly from a traditional college modality with about 30% of our students being served online to going to almost 100%, and in the spring around 70% online, and now back down to about 60% online serving students with the pandemic. So that's kind of what's happening at Hillsborough.
One quick follow-up question, Dr. Johansen. Do you find that ramping up and then ramping back down the purely online courses, is that driven by the elasticity that's needed on your side as the institution, or is that driven by the needs and requests of the students, or is it a little bit of both?
I think it's a little bit of both. We did try to do our schedule based on understanding really what students wanted. And then of course, if they were demanding more, and it's a little bit of a catch-22, because if you don't offer it, you don't know if there's the demand. So we tried to offer both modalities and even alternative modalities, which we'll talk about in a minute, in addition to online and just strictly face-to-face. But we tried to offer both for all of our sections to see what filled. And of course, our online classes were filling faster than our face-to-face, which led us to believe there was more demand when you had both options, right? Now, we didn't always have both options at all. We have 5 campuses at all 5 of our locations. We didn't always have that. So that could skew the data a bit.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. All right. Janelle, what can you tell us about Rio Salado College?
Sure. Rio Salado College is a public 2-year institution in Tempe, Arizona. We were founded in 1978 as a college without walls, which meant that we were really designed and built all our business processes and systems to be highly flexible with 40 start days a year. We are one of 10 Maricopa community colleges in Maricopa County in the Phoenix metropolitan area. However, we have always been delivering online correspondence education. Well, we went online in the late 1990s, but we've always been highly flexible and leaders in distance education. So prior to the pandemic, we were about 60% serving students online, which really helped our transition and retention during that initial fall and spring during the pandemic. We really pride ourselves on our flexibility, our affordability, and our quality. We even have some of our own systems, like a proprietary learning management system and a proprietary predictive analytics system we call PACE, that help us keep students on track for course completion and term-to-term retention. And we were experimenting with things like a tuition cap prior to the pandemic. So that really positioned us, I think, well, that first year. We are getting harder hit this second year, which is really interesting. And I have some hypotheses why. We used to fit this niche for the higher ed landscape, even across the country, helping students who might not be able to meet the schedule at their home institution, or their course was canceled, their course got full, their course wasn't available in an online modality, and so they could pick up a course with Rio. In fact, 70% of the students we were serving prior to the pandemic were coming to us not to complete degrees with us, but to complete a course or two and transfer it to another institution. And I'm really proud of that niche we serve in the higher ed landscape, but you could see how that might be impacted now by students having those options available to them at their home institutions. For the first time ever, our dual enrollment is exceeding the number of online students we're seeing, which is really interesting, to Dr. Johansen's point. And then for the first year of the pandemic, we were unable to serve our incarcerated students who are in-person programs served through correspondence education. And that was, really hard to lose that ability to serve those students in our prisons in our county. So that's a brief understanding of Rio, and I look forward to sharing more about the institution.
Sure. Janelle, it's interesting to me that, it's really, you all were trailblazers when it comes to distance education. In what ways did, being a college without walls, having that DNA help you pivot really quickly to the new normal where everything really was online?
Well, we did a study recently of our students, and their efficacy in adopting educational technology was very high because they were so used to it. because we have our own online learning management system, each course is consistent. And I think that's a big factor in terms of student experience, the ability to navigate every class. It looks exactly the same. The content varies, but there's no variation in quality, and you don't have a variation across faculty about how they're designing their online instruction. So our model itself helps us to scale. It's highly elastic. As it says on the slide, we've never canceled an online class. So that's quite a guarantee to be able to run a class with just a student or two, because we built our business processes to be able to schedule and pay our faculty in accordance with a highly elastic structure. And that is really innovative when you think about those pioneers who designed the institution that way in the 80s to be able to still sustain and persevere through whatever changes we've encountered throughout higher education as it's evolved. So I feel like because we had all that experience, you'll see how we were able to pivot into some more innovative spaces during the pandemic, and the institution was well prepared because we have that spirit of entrepreneurship in our DNA.
Wonderful. We saw some of the same things within our partners. So if they already had a strong virtual presence in terms of student services, or if they had many hybrid or online courses, those institutions made a transition sometimes in a week. Other institutions who didn't have all those kind of support scaffolding structures in place, it was much more disruptive. So I'm so glad to hear you all were able to not only make the transition, but scale really effectively and quickly. So here's a few more things I'd love for you to share, because it's definitely part of our mission at Upswing, but also everyone here is interested in serving underrepresented students. But I want to hear more about your specific methodologies there at Rio Salado.
Yeah, thanks. And I think this contrasts well to what Dr. Deb shared in terms of the students we serve. We know across higher ed, primarily female, so we continue to lose men and male of color in our demographic as we've gone through the pandemic, which is concerning. We became a Hispanic serving institution just this last year, which is very exciting for us. You can see the number of degrees we offer and the number of courses we offer. Typically, we serve from 30,000 to 50,000 online learners annually, but that age point, the average age is a little bit higher than what Deb is seeing in her community college. We tend to have working adults, parents, that student that has other obligations, typically self-selects an online modality. And I forgot to mention earlier, Rio's model is asynchronous. So it is unique in that it's very self-directed, and that can fit quite well to a student who has other commitments in their personal and professional lives. And we serve a majority of first-gen students, first time in college. So as we've designed these virtual services, like you talked about, our virtual tutoring and our help desk and all these wraparound services that we've already had virtual prior to the pandemic, they're really catered to provide outreach to first generation students. And our predictive analytics modeling helps us to better serve those students as well.
Wonderful. I wanted to kind of take a moment here just to kind of acknowledge the disproportionate effect on enrollment in students of color, students from low-income backgrounds. These are just there's so many quotes out there, and I've been following it really closely since the beginning because it aligns so well with our mission and with the students you both serve as well. These are just a couple of quotes that I thought were really powerful and will kind of lead us into the broader discussion of enrollment. But there's one quote here that says the Tennessee community colleges saw a decline in white students of 17%, Hispanic students declined by 18%, but Black females declined 27%, and Black male students declined by a staggering 35%. So this is directly in line, unfortunately, with what you've just mentioned, Janelle, that we're not only losing students of color in that disproportionate group, we have a second tier of disproportionate loss, which is male students of color. So I'd like to talk about that in a moment, but for the second quote, this is also, I had to read it twice. I wanted to make sure I wasn't actually reading it wrong, but this 11.4% is the decrease in graduates from high poverty high schools that are going straight to college compared to those who did so in 2019. So the decrease from 2018 to 2019 was 1.6%. 2019 to 2020, the decrease in these students from these high poverty high schools going straight to college was 11.4%. That's more than 1 in 10 that did not go straight to college. So I don't know that anyone has the answer to this, but I wonder if anyone, either of you, has thoughts on, why disproportionately males are not re-enrolling or enrolling for the first time, and how we might think about addressing that once we kind of have some hypotheses as to why. I'll leave it open to either one of you.
So one of the things we've been thinking about, we have the same statistic. The numbers, of course, aren't exactly the same, but it's the same phenomena. I think it goes back a little bit to priorities and availability and access. And if you're at home and you're trying to worry about food on the table, you're less likely to be thinking about how to change that dynamic. And or if you're at home watching children or or siblings, or you don't have access to the people who may have provided you those avenues and pathways to go to college. It's something at Hillsborough that we did at the end of last academic year. We embedded our enrollment counselors in the high schools 1 day a week. And we did that in an online format as well. We saw a bit of an uptick from that, but I think we have to do much better. I think that's just the beginning.
Yeah, I'll just add, I don't know the reasons why. However, this trend was happening prior to the pandemic. And to my earlier point, now it's been accelerated to a really remarkable rate. And what we're doing at Rio, we have started a male empowerment network program to kind of be a bridging academy from a high school to our community college. We've started to partner more with HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, creating scholarship pathways specifically to attract these minority populations to higher education. And then we began experimenting with changes in our curriculum, which is really intriguing, about how to better represent minority students in our online courses and curriculum. And one study showed in a psychology course that it helped retain those students of color better when they saw images of males of color in our classes.
It's really insightful, and it makes perfect sense. It is the if you see it, you can be it kind of phenomenon. But it's interesting too that we may not know all the causes, but I'm glad you mentioned, Dr. Johansen, this is a trend, unfortunately, that we saw before the pandemic that again has just been accelerated and exacerbated. So I love that each of you are thinking about kind of creative ways to insert your own staff and support into those communities. And we have seen, we work with about 15% of HBCUs. Often they have a really strong, male mentorship program to bring someone from starting in high school and give them ideas about what college life is like, talk to them about everything from study skills to financial literacy and what it's like to be a freshman and how to navigate that. And sometimes that even means maybe sitting with that family and helping them fill out some of the forms that are so confusing if nobody in your family's ever filled those out. If you're a first year college student who's also first generation, it really, really helps to have someone just take the time and sit with you and your family to sort through some of those things. So now I want to talk a little bit more about this decline in enrollment. And I'm going to go over to you here, Dr. Johansen, and talk about this first time in college enrollment impact due to the pandemic. This is a chart that you'd provided to spur the jumping off point for this segment of the conversation. Tell me some of the things you see here and what some of the trends are you see in this data.
And this chart came from a Chronicle article. I believe it was the end of last week it came out, and it was based on the National Center for Educational Statistics. But these are the top 10 drops in enrollment in first time in college students from fall of 19 to 20. So we saw when that initial pandemic hit. And really I think it goes back to that conversation of access and then value of a higher education. And of course, we don't know these answers. There's speculation, you dig into data, and we're going to talk about data and how it helps you understand these phenomena later. But I do think that it's incredibly important to understand that our first time students in college, if we don't continue to serve that demographic, we will not help with, closing that economic gap, right? It's incredibly important that we continue to bring education to those who might not otherwise have been served. That changes not just that person's family, but their entire, the next generations of that person's family. And so these numbers are startling and should make us very concerned. And I think everyone on the call certainly should be looking at what this looks like at your own institution and finding out what's going on. But an 86% drop, obviously that's the number one there with College of Marin. That's really concerning and something we've got to pay attention to. So in the chat, I'd welcome any comments. I mean, we'll talk about those later, but any comments you have about why you think this might be happening. But again, reference that Chronicle article. It goes into further detail about some of the different data points. But again, this one we need to pay attention to.
Absolutely. I see 3 of our partners on here, Dr. Johansen. I can speak to those 3. They're all very high in terms of percentage of students who are Hispanic or Black students. Some of them are in really rural communities. And these are the communities that really benefit so much when those students have the opportunity to go further their education. And I think all of us in higher education are thinking about what post-secondary education can look like. And I think everyone's broadened their horizons as to 4-year college degrees are wonderful, but maybe it's not for everyone. Any kind of post-secondary education is highly valuable, will have an immediate and lasting impact on not only that individual, but their family and maybe even the generation after them. So I'm glad you brought this up because it really does tee up the rest of this conversation. So as we flip here, I'd love for each of you to just address some of the specific changes you've seen. And I certainly made note of the increase in new student applications. So I'd love for you to touch on that as well. But Janelle, if you want to kick us off with some of the things you saw at Rio Salado College and the inferences you drew maybe from those statistics.
Yeah, I'd like to actually go back to the prior slide first and comment that as a system of 10 colleges in Maricopa County, which is the Phoenix metropolitan area, we were down about 36% for that same time frame, which is highly concerning because our county's booming, it's growing, the housing market is exploding, and we're wondering why aren't the learners coming to seek that community college education. And there's other variables there about these big employers providing their own educational pathways or not requiring degrees anymore to get gainfully employed. But I just want to underline what you said about the perhaps rural and minority populations. We have to be mindful of that digital divide as well, which we saw it had been a factor, even though we were serving primarily online learners prior to the pandemic. So thank you. I want to just comment on that, and then I can go on to what we're seeing right now. This fall, we're down still in year-over-year headcount compared to this point in time last fall. And again, we were on a decline in enrollment overall. We had seen an uptick in 2019 and 2020, right before the pandemic. We started to actually grow in enrollments again at Rio Salado College. So this is concerning that now we're in a downward trajectory again. And as I indicated, we lost the ability to serve one whole population, our incarcerated reentry program. We lost the ability to serve a whole nother partnership program that we have offered on site when employers went virtual. So our ability to be diverse and have many different service models within our institution helped us to sustain throughout the pandemic. I was surprised we actually didn't grow during the pandemic. I assumed, as a previously online institution and one that had been a leader in distance education, that students would want to come somewhere where we knew how to do online learning. But I didn't find students to be that discerning. They were willing to just go to the institution that offered the modality they needed at the moment. So I'm hoping moving forward that we can recover some of those students because of our unique asynchronous model and all the individual flexibilities it offers. You can see in my second statistic that a really impressive number of new student applicants, first time to college student applicants is increasing remarkably. So we know our marketing is working, and we've been very hyper focused on our enrollment funnel, converting these leads, understanding the quality of the prospective student leads coming in, and actually our enrollment practices and processes, and where we may have created unintended barriers for our students in our own systems and technology and business processes, and really being forced to come to a reckoning with some of those deeply rooted systemic issues that weren't such a problem before the pandemic. Now it's preventing some students from getting through the enrollment process. So we're seeing students apply and admit and then not register for courses. And we've done a few surveys about why. And they may indicate, issues due to the pandemic, personal reasons, questions about how to finance their education, or maybe we're not responding to them quick enough in our processes. So we do rely on students self-serving. And so they have to navigate themselves through these fairly complex enrollment processes and systems that I think is unrealistic for a first generation student to understand and be able to navigate. So in a weird way, I'm glad this happened, because we really needed to fix these root issues regardless. And so I'm seeing a lot of positive change about getting in there, addressing root issues, and helping all students have an easier enrollment process into our institution. Our fall to fall retention, some of those same reasons were cited. The pandemic's been cited a lot. Finances are cited a lot. And then we're having students cite, the need of having to help either be a caretaker right now to another family member or to their own children as we navigate this health crisis. That's what we're seeing at Rio.
So at HCC, we're also seeing very similar things. While our decline was a little less than looks like Rio had, and our increase in student applications was also significantly less, but it was up as well. And one of the results that activities we've put in place is we've created really an enrollment management group that is not just a task force, but a standing group that's going to look at the processes, because we've seen the exact same thing. Our processes are probably standing in our way because students don't necessarily understand, and where before they may have come in or seen other students and asked that peer-to-peer conversation. It's a little harder to do that online. We were actually having a conversation earlier how you lost the cooler talk, right, with the pandemic and with online. So you may have asked someone earlier, hey, how do you do this? And the student or a friend may have helped you through that. We don't see as much of that. And I think that's one thing that's impacting this as well. So we are taking a good look at our processes, mapping it out, seeing where the bottlenecks are and trying to streamline it to make sure that our students are able to seamlessly access the education that they seek. So yeah, we had a decline in our head count. However, our decline in actual FTE is much greater. So we've seen that while we have the number of students, they are taking less courses, and that's something we've seen pretty consistently over the last 12 months. I'm not sure at Rio if you've seen that a similar situation, but and I don't know if that's a result of being just kind of playing it safe. I'll take a few just to see how it goes. It's a different modality. Much of that makes sense if students are engaging in that behavior. And we've asked and surveyed as well. And again, the pandemic cited, money is often cited, the finances and resources to be able to support the education, as well as family situations. So that may be, caregiving or job situation, something of that nature, which are typical things community colleges we've dealt with for many years. I think it's just on heightened, it's in a heightened situation now than it's been in the past. So we have to look at it just a little differently.
Deb, it's interesting. We're seeing fewer students take more courses. And I think that's a healthy behavior, as that can be a lead indicator to completion rates, right? And my hypothesis is some of the tuition caps and innovative ways we're helping students fund their education by taking X number of credits with us. I think that's helping students to be more, take more credits with us each semester. So that's interesting. And it's kind of a good indicator in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I can definitely vouch for is, we talked to a lot of different colleges and universities, and I don't know that it matters what type of institution you are, but I consistently hear anecdotal stories about, I walked through, as a college administrator, I walked through the application process with my son or daughter, and it was highly confusing. There was many steps. It was easy to get lost. I helped write some of these procedures. I can't even navigate it myself. So I think one of the things that I've heard that's been helpful is just to go through that process yourself and to think about the places where, particularly if you are a first generation student, if you may not have family, friends, or other, folks that you can draw upon who have experience and can walk you through this, where are the places those students might get stuck, and how can you help them through self-service in particular? Because I also think where students might have many years ago come on campus, filled out forms, talk to people in real time, all of this is happening asynchronously. It's night times, weekends, and holidays when your institutions may be closed, partially closed, or those resources just aren't available to them. So figuring out where students are really seeing that friction in the process, eliminating it where you can. Many institutions I spoke with have said they've just looked at every single step, mapped it out, almost like a student journey would be mapped out, and then they eliminated some steps that just weren't even necessary, or kind of collapsed them where they could. So I think that's an incredibly important point, because all these students are trying to get in, and if they're just discouraged, or they get stuck and they don't know who to ask for help, or they don't have great self-serve help that's available to them, they may not end up enrolling and actually showing up for that first day of class. So that was something really, really interesting that I saw. So now we're going to switch right to action. So I love that both of your institutions immediately went into action and spun up a bunch of things, but also had so many programs and processes already in place that allowed you to do even more. So I wanted to start with you, Janelle, and some of the things that Rio Salado did in response to the changes that were driven by the pandemic, but also that underlying structure, again, that's in your DNA by being this college without walls, and how that might have helped you with some of the challenges in enrollment.
Yeah, at Rio, because of that, that distance learning foundation, we were well positioned, and the things that are in italics on this list were already happening prior to the pandemic. And the things that we've added, I'm confident, are going to help us even grow after the pandemic, because it's helping us to think of new and creative business models for sustainable growth after the pandemic. But I want to back up to the first bullet, to your point you just said. We did some secret shopping, and I think that's a really effective way to understand a prospective student's experience. So we put in like a request for information, try to understand how long did it take for someone from the outreach team to contact this person, or we call into the contact center and attempt to enroll in a course, or also attempt to self-serve. So we try to take all those front doors that a student might experience and understand, really from a lean methodology, what can we eliminate? How can we make it more effective and efficient? And so what we have is a contact center for inbound calls, and they really help us to support the thousands of students who are self-servers. So they'll just call when they get hung up in the self-service process and have some assistance there to get them through wherever they may be hung up. We've revised our advertising campaigns to be more tone appropriate to the context. We actually launched a campaign about our expertise in leadership and online education to try to, again, show that credibility in this space, that we didn't just go online in fall 2020. We've been online for 20 years. Like Dr. Deb, we had a strategic enrollment management committee at the college. So they had really formalized their SMART goals and a plan. And then we put that plan to a measurable dashboard so we can monitor our progress towards our strategic enrollment management goals, which is both enrollment and retention and completion across the college. So that's working well for us. We had a Drift chatbot that was a function that was more experimental prior to the pandemic. We ended up scaling it across all of our web interfaces because we could program little playbooks in there, and it would help students address frequently answered questions with more responsiveness than maybe if we weren't open 24/7, they could still get an answer to a frequently asked question. FA Live was a really neat innovation that the financial aid team did. We talked a little bit about just financial literacy, the complexity of how to complete financial aid forms, especially for that student who's a first generation learner. So we started using Zoom, something as simple as a Zoom platform, to have office hours to answer questions about how to apply for financial aid. And it's been really, students love it. We'll probably maintain that after the pandemic because it's been a great service model to the students we serve. We added an outreach and recruitment team. So this was new staff that we hired to help with proactive outreach. In addition to our dedicated advisors and our success coaches and all the other advising and counseling teams we have, we wanted someone focused on really outreaching to students stuck in that enrollment funnel or very specific groups with a consistent message to get them back in class and back on track. And that's been proving out to have some early successes for us as well. As many institutions did around the country, we used our emergency funds to help reduce the cost and waive that barrier for students to make it easier to take a free credit course. We issued some laptops to students who would be impacted by a digital divide. We had that tuition cap, which we think incentivized students to take more credits with us, those that we did attract these past few fall semesters. We put some new programs in place to supplement our existing counseling and career services, such as incentivizing vaccinations and giving out gift cards for basic needs, which was highly valuable. And students said sometimes that gift card or that $100 to pay for their gas or their internet that month made all the difference in keeping them in class throughout the pandemic. Even at Rio, we've been diversifying our modalities. As I indicated, we were pretty well an asynchronous online institution, and then we had a correspondence and an in-person, but we experimented with live online and other hybrid modalities that typically wouldn't have been our normal offering. So that's interesting to see and think about where that might evolve after the pandemic. We implemented an online community engagement platform through Inscribe as an experiment to help create community for entirely online learners. And so we've hosted a peer-to-peer community. It has some soft artificial intelligence in it, but we're watching engagement to see if that helps with inclusion, belonging, engagement, and hopefully retention and completion when students find a place for that social engagement that is related to the campus experience that they might not get in an entirely online institution. So we'll be studying that and publishing out a white paper in spring semester. We implemented new non-credit on-ramps. So we started getting really creative with non-credit short skills pathways that could then be either awarded through prior learning assessment or course equivalency and transfer in credit into Rio. So we're experimenting with a few different types of success academies and low risk, low cost, even higher flexibility on-ramps. Straighter Line is one of our partners in that area. And we're trying to see if that helps students who might not perceive higher education to be right for them right now, that there's other ways they can kind of start that journey in a very low risk methods. And then there's this B2B strategy. We've been able to accomplish some really large B2B, business to business partnerships with corporate employers. And this is pretty common in community colleges. This is what we do. We partner with industry, but at Rio, we started partnering more with organizations that were willing to fund tuition assistance entirely for their incumbent workforce as a means to retain their workforce, not just through the pandemic, but after, and incentivize them to grow in their skills and up their careers within their organization. So one big one, we're partnering with JBS Better Futures program, and it's one of the largest tuition-free community college programs in the country. So I'm excited for JBS to launch. It just started, and we're starting to see students trickle in through that new enrollment pathway. And again, we're just trying to diversify new doors, front doors for students to find us and for us to serve them.
That's an impressive list, Janelle. You really set yourself up for success. And then I love how many of these items were actually experiments, and not all of them are what I would think of like, this is going to give us a quantitative result. Some of it is around sense of belonging, student engagement. And I think one of the many things the pandemic has taught us, if you will, is that student engagement, while it might be more difficult at first to measure, is one of the major reasons you may have a student apply and actually enroll and show up for class, or persist fall to fall. It's something that's a little bit more anecdotal, but we see it every day at Upswing. I'm sure you see it on your campuses. It's really hard to impress upon people, again, outside of higher ed, that student engagement piece, that sense of belonging, maybe that connection with a peer or mentor could be the tipping point that keeps that student on track. So with that, I'd love to go over to you, Dr. Johansen, and learn about some of your different initiatives at HCC.
So just like Rio, we had inbound call management, if you will, and we outsourced that to Ed America. We also did call campaigns that were specific around enrollment or take one more class for a full load, that type of thing. We have an entire group of advisors and enrollment development coordinators. As I mentioned before, we placed our enrollment development coordinators, which are like recruiters, into the high schools. One of the things that happened in our local community is the school system had to reduce their budget significantly, which meant they ended up laying off a significant number of people. Many of those were the career counselors and the college counselors that were already embedded in the high school. So we found an immediate gap that we needed to fill, and we did that very quickly with our enrollment and development coordinators. So they went into the high schools, so they were there physically. In our county this year, this academic year, all the students are back in session. There isn't online education for the K-12 unless you choose to do that as your primary through the state of Florida, the online system through the state of Florida Virtual School, I think it's called. So this year they're physically there. They were there as well last year, but they're also doing online sessions, which is helpful for the students that were online, particularly last spring. We updated our advertising campaigns. We did quite a bit of research about students and the students in our demographic, and this idea of individuality and being your own person has come to light. So you'll see some of our ads there at the bottom where it says "Be You." So we updated that, and that was really important in our area where we have lots of commuter traffic. Radio ads, we know, are still one of the most popular ways of getting information, and so in addition to our online advertisement, we, just like Rio, we put scholarships in place and waives outstanding student debt that helps students stay on track. That was we used some of our federal funding for that. In Florida, we do not have, in Tampa, we don't have a mask mandate. We do have a mask expectation, which brings a whole slew of other issues with COVID tracing and tracking where we've had infections or things happening, particularly with our in-person classes where we have to manage these things across multiple sections. So just the uncertainty around COVID, we know from students, has been a source of frustration and concern with students because they're not sure what to expect. And I think this is across the board. So we've tried to make that as clear as we can in a very changing pandemic, right? When we started in August, we thought that we were going to be more on the downside of infections, and then with the Delta variant, infections had increased. So that did make things a bit more challenging for us. We have also incentivized vaccinations. We're doing 50 $2,000 scholarships for students. They'll enter into this drawing if they've been vaccinated. And we've seen that type of incentivization across the state as well. Again, the Enrollment Management Committee, permanent versus a task force, something we talked about earlier, but I think this is crucial to our work going forward and learning to meet students where they are at. That's going to be critical work for us. We're also in the process of picking a new ERP, and with that ERP, we'll be able to really put in place those new processes to match what we'd like things to look like for the enrollment processes. And then we looked at our modality. Being a typical traditional community college, we of course continue face-to-face, and we have online, which we adapted very quickly. We included what we're calling D-Live courses, which is you have your class at 9 a.m. on Monday and Wednesday. You just happen to get online versus going to a classroom. So that's what we were calling D-Live. And then we have something called a simulcast, which we're retrofitting experimenting with equipment in 120 of our classrooms to be able to have, you know, maybe half your class is sitting in the class and then the other half is sitting at home or wherever they'd like to be, or maybe you're doing some partnership internationally with classes internationally. So trying to really upgrade that experience to a much more modern experience. And what I find a little bit comical about it is that, you know, 20 years ago or 15 years ago, we would use a cable or telephone lines to try to do this simulcast class. So it's a bit of a return to that, but with modern technology, if you will. And then, and last is certainly not least, and something that actually we just had an article come out in EdScoop today about our Gwen artificial intelligence platform, and we are experimenting with it and helping students to progress on to graduation. So our first experiment with artificial intelligence was to find our students that have 15 credits left to graduate and see if we can't help prompt them on, this is the class that you need. Hey, you've got 15 credits left. Here are the classes you need. Would you like to enroll? Do you need some help enrolling? Things like that. And they've programmed Gwen to understand emojis and some slang and to understand humor, which I think is really important. Again, when we're talking about meeting people where they're at, I think having that that type of artificial intelligence is very different than a robotic feel to artificial intelligence engagement. So Gwen is our newest experimentation that I actually have incredibly high hopes for. And it's very exciting. And I think that certainly it's going to be standard, I think, eventually across institutions going forward. So, and it's a little bit probably what I like about chat bots in general is that, you know, you can embed them on your website and you could chat back and forth like Janelle was talking about. AI, as we're meeting students on TikTok or Instagram where they're already at versus, again, having them come to us. So I think that's the dynamic that we're going to see change, is going to students versus coming to us.
Deb, I just want to highlight the mobility that offers, right? Where students are using their mobile devices to find our schools and to come to school. I think that's really exciting. I look forward to reading your article. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I'll make sure we post the link in the chat.
Please do. All right, now we got a few minutes left. I really want to talk about data. So I want to learn from each of you how you monitored, assessed, and acted on this ever-changing landscape of enrollment numbers heading into this fall. So we'll start with you, Dr. Johansen, and then we'll, if you want to just hand it right over to Janelle in the interest of time, we'll flow right through.
Sure. So we have a pretty robust data bank, if you will. We use SAS, visual analytics. It's actually what the artificial intelligence is built upon, is on the SAS platform, and or speaks to it and talks back and forth. So you can see just real quickly on the screen a few of the sample reports that we use. We're in the data daily. If you'll flip to the next slide, I know we're in a little bit of a time crunch, you'll see some of the quick visual data that we're able to access with changes in enrollment and you know, what's going up, what's down. Like our educator prep program is up. You can see that in green very quickly. You know, FTE's up, head counts down. So you can kind of ask questions why and get into that management. This data is searchable. You can see the boxes at the bottom. The way that I use this data on a regular basis is I'm looking for trends and trying to understand what's happening. And once I have a question, I usually will dig in the data and kind of slice the data some, and then ask the next follow-up question and slice further. And so it's very much someone who's comfortable with data and understands how to dig into the data type of dashboard. And I know that Rio, if you want to talk about how you've taken that a step further, I think would be very interesting for folks.
Thanks, Deb. Sorry about the time crunch. So I'll highlight what we do is we really try to empower leaders to use data to solve issues at the student level. So we spent our summer an 8-week program to get our staff certified in data literacy. And you know, we can't neglect the time and learning curve it will take for people to be able to use dashboards in a meaningful way. We took an intentional shift accompanied by professional development to stop focusing on lag measures, even like enrollment or completion, but to focus on lead measures like applicants, leads, and then course momentum, credit momentum, et cetera. So we really started to hone in on 4 weekly metrics there now that we're producing in weekly reports. And if you want to go to the next slide, I'll give you a taste of how we visualize our dashboards at Rio using Power BI as a data visualization tool. A lot of emphasis on data literacy, on usability. And it's the same data that Deb's using, but you can see that people can understand it in probably 30 seconds or so, what's happening with the trend. On the right-hand side of the screen is an example of our fall enrollment snapshot and how we slice and dice or maybe filter out specific population, student demographics, certain programs, and then those key performance indicators that we're monitoring, as well as getting much more sophisticated in monitoring our enrollment funnel, which is illustrated in the bottom graphic. So we really understand how many applicants are being admitted and actually registering in courses, and what can we be doing there more proactively to help students not get stuck in the enrollment process.
Wonderful. I love that it's immediately actionable. And even though you really invested in the data literacy point, like anyone can come in and pretty quickly glean some of the trends and hone in on those and make more data or insight driven decisions. I think it's fantastic. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead to the Q&A, and I'm going to pop over myself here into the chat and see if we have questions. So if you haven't yet put in any of your questions, go ahead. I'll start reading out some of the first ones. We've got a few minutes left. We have some wonderful experts here. I'd love for you to pick their brains, ask any questions that are related to today's discussion. But if you have questions, go ahead and put those in the chat. I'm going to start with some ones we had earlier today. This one's interesting. If you had to start this fall semester over, what would you do differently, if anything? Either one of you, whoever would like to take that one.
Deb, I'll just go really quickly. I wanted to be able to have a campaign where we could offer free course retakes and just start out the gate with something really bold and free. And I think that would have been highly attractive to students who are on the fence.
I think that's a great idea, Janelle. I love that idea. I think for us really would have been probably more preparation, as I'm sure with every institution around COVID and COVID preparations, being heavily face-to-face. We were expecting to be able to do so much more face-to-face than we are able to do. So now we're backtracking again from that. So I think just, understanding really how a pandemic cycles is helpful and how we move forward.
Terrific answers. We got a couple minutes left. Another question that came in was, you've shared a lot of your current and ongoing tactics and projects. What are some of the next projects or the next steps you're taking in the future, or that you're thinking about putting into motion?
Well, I think that for us, the next steps is really looking at economically where our community is going, being primarily this community's college. I think it's very important for us to be looking at what education is needed in the area and how we're going to do it. And so in addition to rolling out AI, hopefully much more significantly than our experimentation in the future, I think looking at our programming, and one area that we are working on trying to start up now is something called financial technology, or fintech. It's a growing area, and it's really artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, blockchain, cryptocurrency, that idea around training in those fields, which in the financial industry, which is exploding, and it's certainly exploding in this area. And so something we want to make sure that we're able to support students in that arena. And again, that's just modernizing how we our programming that we offer. So that's right out of the gate right now.
Yeah, ours ironically is around programming as well, Deb, making sure what we offer is relevant and that we can get it to market really quickly. We're also looking at what we're calling micro credentials, short skills training, that they don't always need to be credit bearing, because that seems to matter less and less in the changing landscape.
I did have something I'd like to add just about where to go in the future. And this isn't necessarily something, HCC is doing, but I think it's something higher ed leaders need to think about in general. And that's really the impact of, the way job creation is happening and the skills that are expected for those jobs. So I think the idea of a traditional college model is really shifting. There's more focus now on that immediate job placement. Even the grants that we go after really focus on that immediate job placement versus a long drawn out program. I think the employers and our technology will drive a lot of this conversation. Employers, if they're willing to accept micro credentials or badging or some other type of assurance of skill level, right, along with technology and utilizing blockchain, which will down the road, we anticipate allow for the sequencing or gathering of these maybe alternative credentials, whereas a degree right now is what we give and say, hey, you've achieved these skills, right? The employer can accept that as you have critical thinking, problem solving, and you have whatever the degree is. With blockchain being allowing us to give credibility to alternative type credentialing and micro credentialing, I think that really will change the dynamic. And I think that's something for us to focus on if we're thinking about what's coming in the future. I think that's coming, and I think it's just a matter of how we leverage it and how we help with it being a catalyst to change or not. So, and again, that's up to employers and technology a bit as well. And I think we have to kind of pay attention to how we do it.
Wonderful. Well, that brings us to time. We had so much more we could have talked about today. Both of you have been so insightful and so willing to share your experiences and some of the solutions you found to some of these really difficult challenges. So first of all, thanks to each of you, our panelists, Dr. Johansen and Janelle. Thanks to all of our attendees today. Thank you for your questions and your time. I hope you both have a wonderful rest of the semester, and we hope everyone would join us for the second of the next leadership series here at Upswing. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day and wonderful rest of your week. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.